Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen wa sallallahu wa sallam wa baraka nabi Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajmain. Assalamu alaikum and good morning, Instagram fam, friends and followers of As-Safi. Thank you for joining me for this installment in our series under the title or under the theme, Your Shahadah, Your Pact with Allah. Don't break your pact with Allah. And yesterday we began talking about the concept of the Shahadah being a pact with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, a promise that we make to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and how we should be as committed or even more committed to fulfilling this pact with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala than we are with fulfilling our pacts and covenants, or the pacts and covenants that we make with other human beings and with creation. And before going any further, today what I wanted to do was I wanted to talk about what constitutes breaking the promise, what constitutes a breach of contract with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the reason why I wanted to do that today briefly was because some people may not apply this discussion to themselves, because they have confined or restricted what constitutes a breach of contract or a breaking of the pact to just quitting Islam altogether. And they may not realize that they themselves are guilty of a form or a level of a breach of contract. And so I wanted to give some examples. It won't be an exhaustive list, but just to give some examples so we can start to do some deep introspection and look at ourselves and see how we may be guilty of breaching the contract with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and correct that. So what constitutes, what are some examples, what are some of the ways that we as Muslims in general, and convert Muslims in particular, what are some of the ways that we break our pact with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and commit a breach of contract with Allah? So the obvious one is quitting Islam altogether. Just basically deciding that we're not going to be Muslim anymore. One day getting to the point where we take the prayer rug, we take the collection of brochures and little booklets that we have about Islam, we take our Quran, English translation of the Quran, we take our hijab if it applies, we take our dhikr beads if we're into that. We take all of that, we put it into a trash bag, and we march it out to the curb, and that's the end of Islam. And then we go off to the supermarket and buy a pack of bacon. We just quit Islam. We decide, I'm not Muslim anymore. That's a chapter of my life that is closed. And this is happening. It's happening at a very concerning clip for revert Muslims. It's almost like Islam has become a revolving door. People become Muslim and then they leave Islam. They become Muslim and they leave Islam. They become Muslim and they leave Islam. And we're seeing it in communities across the U.S. at least. And just as a side point, this is one of the reasons why we have to be very careful not to give out the Shahadah like candy. Now, that doesn't mean if somebody comes and they're interested in Islam that we shouldn't give them the Shahadah, we shouldn't let them be Muslim, but we should make sure, and I think this is where we fall short, we should make sure that they understand what they're getting themselves into, quite frankly. What it means to say these words, to make this declaration that it is a promise, it's a pact, and you're going to be held by Allah to that pact. And so really understand what you're getting yourself into and the seriousness of of the step that you're taking, and then take it accordingly. I think sometimes we just really don't. People don't really understand what Islam is. They don't understand what they're getting themselves into, and then once they get into it and they realize, they just retreat. And we're partially at fault for that, for just, as I said, giving out the Shahadah like candy. Let me get back to the discussion. So another way that we we commit a breach of contract with Allah, we break the pact with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, is by not being fully committed to Islam, by practicing Islam intermittently. And this is also something which is occurring amongst Muslims generally and amongst reverts as well, where we practice Islam intermittently. So basically we practice Islam sometimes, but not all the time. We practice some of Islam, but not all of Islam. So for example, we may pray, but not fast. We may fast, but not pray, because we find fasting easier than praying 5 times a day. Or we may pray some of the prayers, but not all of the prayers. We may even pray, and we may pray part of a prayer. So dhuhr is arba raka'at, it's 4 units. A person may pray 2 and say, that's enough. This is what I can do. And I'm just expecting God to accept it. So this is another way that we breach our contract with Allah, because when we, as we said yesterday, when we say ashhadu an la ilaha illallah wa ashhadu anna Muhammadur Rasulullah, we're committing ourselves to worshiping Allah the way He ought to be worshipped and the way that He demands to be worshipped, in accordance with the guidance of His deputy Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Another way that we commit a breach of contract, or another way that we break our pact, is by applying the view of religious relativism. That truth is relative, religion is relative, the reality of Islam is relative. And so, yeah, I'm a Muslim, but what does it mean to be a Muslim? I have my view on that, and other people have their view, and neither of our views is wrong. Neither of us can say that it's wrong. I have a right to basically say that Islam, this is what Islam means to me. And this is how I choose to practice it and live an Islamic life. This is what this verse in the Quran means to me. And it may mean something else to you, and neither one of us is wrong. The truth is relative. And this is another thing that we're seeing, especially nowadays, becoming a very common trend amongst convert Muslims, that basically they want to take, in their mind, ownership of their faith. And they want to have a faith that is personalized, if you will. And again, this is also a breach of contract, because basically when we say ashhadu an la ilaha illallah, ashhadu anna Muhammadur Rasulullah, then when we say that, we're saying, okay, Allah, I submit, I surrender to you, and I'm going to do things your way. And I recognize that your way is one way, and that I'm not allowed to insert myself in this matter of saying what is truth and what is false, what should be done and what should not be done, what really is Islam and what is not Islam. That's not my place. My place is to follow and not to dictate and not to alter, etc. So this is another way that we breach our contract, and we have to be careful, because many of us fall into this in one way or another, to one degree or extent or another. And one final example that I wanted to give of breaking the pact and breaching the contract, and this is another one that many of us commit: not actively learning about Islam to practice it better, not making a conscious commitment to growing as Muslims through knowledge, through actively seeking knowledge of Islam, actively reading, actively following lectures, sitting in classes and trying to learn about our deen. How can we believe in Allah if we don't know Allah? And how can we know Allah if we don't study about Allah? If we don't read books, listen to lectures, attend classes where we can educate ourselves about who Allah is, who is this Allah that we worship? And this is why the Prophet said, and I'll close with this, he said in the hadith of Anas, collected by Ibn Majah, he said, "Talabul ilm faridatun ala kulli Muslim." He said, seeking knowledge is obligatory upon every Muslim. What does that mean? Does that mean that every Muslim has to become a scholar? Has to basically promulgate an encyclopedic knowledge of Islam? No. But what it does mean is that every Muslim has to actively study his religion to the extent that allows him to practice it correctly, and to the extent that allows him to reach a level of yaqeen that will never allow him to quit Islam, to break his pact or his covenant with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so these are some examples that we should think about and contemplate, and we should apply to ourselves. Take a long, hard look at ourselves and see, am I committing this breach of contract? And therefore, am I one of those people who has forgotten my pact, my Shahadah, my pact with Allah? Am I breaking my pact with Allah? Let's think about it. Let's do some introspection. And let's meet back here tomorrow, inshallah ta'ala, to continue our discussion. Until then, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh from Team Al-Safi.